Do I have to focus? Good. Good evening, everyone. I'm Eric Hartson, Director of Programming here at the Gloucester Writers Center, and I'm happy to welcome you here for this reading, which features these two multi-talented artists, Kerstin Prevallet and Norton. We are thrilled to host this program and to bring these writers in residence at the Eliot House, another of the vast set of literary and cultural resources available to us here in Gloucester and on the North Shore, to Vincent Farini's house. I think that there is very little I can do to prepare you for the range and depth of the work you will hear tonight, except to say that these two artists are living examples of the extraordinary breadth of practices poetry can intertwine into itself as it seeks new avenues of expression. Kay will read first, followed by a brief intermission, during which I hope you'll take part, have some refreshments. We have drinks in the kitchen, cheese, wine, etc. And then Linda will finish out the night. So let me introduce Kay. Kay is the author of 8 books of poetry and many chapbooks. Her work has appeared in journals including the Boston Review and the New Republic, and I think this is still accurate. She teaches and practices at Bard College and the New School.
Yeah.
There we are. She is an artist interested in the meeting place between our physical and spiritual selves, our surfaced and our submerged minds, and interested in bringing these aspects of ourselves into poetry, performances, and rituals. Her work compels us to grapple with the connections between our psychological lives, our traumas and memories, and the broader social landscapes that ourselves in concert bring into being. In provisional and improvisational ways, she makes these connections visible, graspable, and helps us to register the human experience in new ways. Her art helps remind us that the deep origins of poetry are in ritual magic. Language brings the world, internal as well as external, into being. Language acts are a register of emotional and psychological realities worthy of attention. That is, poetry is spellcasting. So she's going to cast some spells.
Oh boy, I nearly said that. Now.
Now you get to bring it. Right?
Thank you. Thank you very much for your focus and attention on that work. I really appreciate that very much. And thank you so much, Henry, for this table that we're all sitting around, and the space, and holding this space for poetry and this legacy. I've felt very connected to this legacy in terms of finding myself at T.S. Eliot's house, but really being an Olson poet. Olson is my lineage and my teacher. My teachers were Robert Creeley, and so Creeley's Olson class really is the reason why I'm a poet. And finding myself in this space of Eliot has been good for thinking and good for creativity and art, and all of that. So I'll just embark on some of that thinking with you here. Through my work with the lineage of Olson over these many years, that I took Creeley's Olson class in 1998, 1997, and have been following that trajectory ever since. But I always loved the 4 quartets because I read the 4 quartets in high school, and that's why I'm a poet. And I think that what I'm trying to say here is that I feel in my poetics, and I think you actually kind of caught that in your introduction, a tension between that kind of Eliot poetics and the Olson poetics. I feel that there's a bit of a war around that, actually. I think that there are turfs that are being defined through that. There are houses that have been built around that, some of them bigger than others, some of them with a hell of a lot more money than others, and a lot more of an endowment, et cetera, and that has to do with a certain kind of way that this art is, received. But after going through Olson and all of that, what I'm trying to say is that in 2012, I rewrote T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets. And this is actually, as you see, the exact design of the Faber and Faber first edition of T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets. So I'll read from that in a little while. But just to say, this has been, being in Gloucester has been very meaningful for me, just as a person who's attempted to consolidate these two very differently male influences on language and the oracle of it that I feel that I've been trying to hold for all these many years. So I will, I guess we'll just get started. You brought that, and I have this is my very beat up copy of the smaller selected that doesn't even have a cover anymore. And then this is one of my prized possessions. This is a bootleg edition of Charles Olson's work that was published in Buffalo, University of Buffalo. I'm not going to say who because it's technically defying all sorts of copyright laws. But it is a beautiful bootleg copy of a selected poems, very decidedly counter to the industry of permission. So I will pass that around, and it's a beautiful. It's called "The Calyx of the Flower Can Cup All Things Within Itself," and that, of course, is one of Olson's great lines. But to get this started, I thought I would begin. I've been teaching for many, many years, and one of the things, and I'm often not mandated to teach things, but twice I've been mandated, once in the prison system at New York State, and the second in Myanmar, Burma, of all places, to teach Plato's Allegory of the Cave. And I just feel like teaching Allegory of the Cave in either the prison industrial complex or a military dictatorship is really quite a tall order for and that's a much longer conversation. But I did at one point, after being so deeply immersed with Plato, decide to take apart the Allegory of the Cave, and so I divided it up into imperatives, prepositions, the auxiliary verb would, the modal auxiliary verb will, acquiescences, and states of being. So I'll just read a little bit of that. So the first are his imperatives. And I said, let me show, behold, and you will see. And now look again, and see. You may further imagine, and suppose once more. You will then proceed to argue. You may now apprehend. And is there anything surprising? Imagine once more. Observe. Yes, therein lies the point. The second are prepositions, which, as you recall from grammar class, orients you, the subject, in time and space. Living in, mouth open toward, can only see before them, turning round their heads, above and behind them, between the fire, wall built along the way, over which the men are passing along. Various materials appear over, fire throws on the opposite wall. The third is the auxiliary verb would, to talk about the future in the past. Would they see only shadows? Would they not suppose that they were naming something? Would they not be sure to fancy? The truth would literally be nothing. He would first see the sun. He would felicitate himself. Would he care for such honors and glories? Would he not say with Homer, he would rather suffer? He who would act rationally, would he not be certain to have his eyes full of darkness? Would he not be ridiculous? The fourth is the modal auxiliary verb will, to express willingness or ability. Will naturally follow, will suffer sharp pains, will distress him, will he be unable to see the realities? What will be his reply? Will he not be perplexed? Will he not fancy that the shadows? Will he not conceive to be in reality? Will he be dazzled? Will he not be able to see anything at all? Will he be required to grow accustomed to the sight? Will he see the shadows best? Will he gaze upon the light of the moon? Will he see the sky? Will he be able to see the sun? Will he see him? Will he contemplate him? Will he then proceed to argue? Will he not be too ready to laugh? Will he first ask whether that soul will count the one happy? Will he pity another? Will there be more reason? Will they affect conversion? Will they not act at all? Will they see then 10,000 times better? Will they know what the several images are? What will be a reality and not a dream? Will it be administered in a spirit? Will our pupils hear this? Will they rule, they who are truly rich? Will they be fighting about the status? What will be the ruin of the rulers? Will the men who are wisest choose them? Will rival lovers fight? The fifth is acquiescence. I see. You've shown me a strange image. True. True, yes. Very true. No question. That is certain. Far truer. True, not at all. In a moment, certainly. Certainly. Clearly. Certainly. To be sure. No question. I agree. Yes. Anything but surprising. This is a very just distinction. They undoubtedly say this. Very true. Yes, very true. Very likely, very true. But is this not unjust? True, quite true, impossible, most true. Indeed, I do not, no question. They are the men, and I will choose them by all means, quite so. And then states of being. Is enlightened or unenlightened? Is approaching nearer to being? Is turned toward the more real existence? Is pointing to the objects as they pass? Is compelled to look straight at the light? Is reluctantly dragged up a steep and rugged ascent? Is he not likely to be pained and irritated as he is the guardian of all? Is the cause of all things? Is the world of sight? Is the sun? Is the ascent of the soul? Is the world of knowledge seen only with effort? Is also inferred? Is the power upon which he who would act rationally is very natural? Is there anything surprising? Is endeavoring to meet the conceptions? Is true of the mind's eye? Is dazzled by the excess of light? Is looking away from the truth? Is the reverse blind? Is forced into the service of evil? Is mischievous in proportion to his cleverness? Is the rule of all their actions? Is another thing which is likely? Is this not unjust? Is unreasonably yours? Is always the best and most quietly governed? Is that true philosophy? Is that best administered? Is that a little better than night is? Is the ascent from below? Is it not just the turning over of an oyster shell? Plato. And then I thought I'd move from that into just this small section from a manuscript that I've been working on for a while, but finally kind of coming into form. So I'm very excited about that. And so this section asks a question that gets to what Eric was speaking about regarding my interest in ritual and language as creating and holding the space of ritual around what might be called an oracle of language. Because if the muses are, muses, then that means that they're holding some kind of knowledge. And I do believe that about language. I do believe that language holds knowledge into and of itself. So one of the knowledges that I practice with language is it possible to use language, this idea of spells, to conjure the dead, to rise the energies, right? Mm-hmm. To bring back to life something. Can language do that? Does it hold that power? I think that's a classic question, from very ancient humanoid time. So this section of this manuscript is going a little bit into that, and it begins with just the section title: If the words fall just right into a rhythm, will the world feel again complete? Mm. And so this one is called Through Outside. If all along you had known it was a mountain, would you go through? If in spite of it you had known it was flaming, would you go in? If in the midst you had known it was an arrow, would you have fallen, would you fall down? If through the horizon you had known it was a swallowing, would you be sailing, would you sail through? If over my dead body you knew ships pass not gently, would you hold tightly, would you hold on? If to you I swing softly, then to you I make out, would to you I come towards, and would you let me in, let me in? And then solar conjuring. There may be no expression of mourning that can ever completely overcome the deep attachment to what has been lost, Mourning is an ongoing process of trying over and over again to make language make sense of a world that will never again feel complete. This just means that without you, I am not complete. If I put language into slots of rhythm, can I make a reality that is now complete? I want her back. I want him back. I want them back. I want the spotted owl and the giant short-faced bear back. I want Bachman's warble and I want the ivy-billed woodpecker. I want all extinct creatures back. If I put language into the spell of rhythm, can I conjure something into this space that has long been gone, but here now is real? This putting language into rhythms and slots is this conjuring a remaking of a body in this space and time that will never come again, come again, come again. You, they, he, she, the red-shouldered hawk, gone. Come again. Come again. Bird on a stone. I have sunk all my vessels, a fish in a fish's bones in your sea. In your sea, a snake on a hook, a whale from some classic book. I have tried through it all, an ant on the grass through it all, a mantis aghast to be free when you're gone to be free. I'll remember all the bees to be free when you're gone. And this is a poem that I wrote for my father. Voices variously heard. Take back the preparation from the flour, from the bread, the citrus from the fruit or the sweet. Take it away from the melon, make it rindy and hard, or the moisture from the clouds make them lighter. And transparent, if the blue was taken away from the sky, everything would be black. The particles from the light take them away, make the objects of the house disappear. Give back the fruits to the flowers. They came so unexpectedly. Why not give back the baskets, the cheese, and all the meatloaf in the car? That could be given back to the driver and pointed in another direction. Give back the pines to the park, the parking lot to the birds, or the air to silence. Give back the field to the football players. All could begin again. As new, it could all be given back to the glacier, to the snow. Give back the knee-deep tread. All of this, all these things could be, and then again. The glacier is not cold, is not a person snow who decides to return to water. The wind is not dry, is not a person winter who decides there's no reason to fly. The air is not liquid, is not a person ocean who decides there's no reason to breathe. If the light were to expose itself as light, would there really be any reason to see? And then this next part leads in from a line from the Kwanon Sutra. So this poem I wrote actually in 2007. It was a part of my book, Afterlife, about my father. And this line from the Kwanon Sutra, one of the sutras, is, if a being is to be saved by a state officer, then a state officer will appear and preach the Dharma. And obviously, in where we are with this consciousness of state officers and the Dharma in the aftermath of George Floyd, and in where we are now in this consciousness, this is a kind of a divine hierarchy, right? Kind of idea which becomes very charged and different and problematic. I believe that wasn't being exactly taken into account when I took that sutra. So that we are all. I am continually learning and absorbing what all of this means. But that is the sutra. So in other words, it's when you get a ticket, well, thank you, officer. I really appreciate the ticket, because I'd be dead otherwise, because I would have taken that turn. If I had taken that turn, who knows what could have happened? Whatever's worse. But in the political complexity of state officers pulling over, particularly black people, and basically, that becomes a huge other context of the quote unquote Dharma, is all I guess I'm trying to say. So, grappling, wrestling, and the poem comes into that moment. If a person is to be saved by a herd of elk, then a herd of elk will appear to the person and lead him to the sunward side of the mountain. If a person is to be saved by a mountain lion, then a mountain lion will appear to the person and lead him across a river. If a person is to be saved by a bee, then a bee will appear to a person and lead him through the sun. If a person is to be saved by a person who understands the Tao, then a person who understands the Tao will appear to a person and teach him about investments. If a person is to be saved by a junkyard dog, then a junkyard dog will appear to a person and lead him to a pot of gold. If a person is to be saved by a pilot, then a pilot will appear to a person and lead him through the rain. If a person looking for an object is to be saved by a shopkeeper, then a shopkeeper will appear to a person and lead him to a different object than the one he was looking for. If a person is to be saved by a person driving a truck, then a person driving a truck will appear to the person and push him off the road. If a person is to be saved by a person opening a window, then a person opening a window will appear to the person and lead him into a house. If a person is to be saved by a person helping another person jumpstart a car, then a person helping another person jumpstart a car will appear to the person and lead him through an electric charge. If a person is to be saved by a person walking with another person who's looking at a plane, then a person walking with another person who is looking at a plane will appear to the person and lead him into the future. If a person is to be saved by a person hitting another person who was the person being hit, then the person hitting another person who was the person being hit will appear to the person and lead him to the cave. If these people and then these people appear to a person, then all these people are here to lead a person home. If a person does not want to go home, then he will be led to the mountain and there he will disappear. If a person disappears on his way to the mountain, then another person will arrive at the mountain and will know that the mountain has led this person into the glacier. Thank you.
The logic is inescapable.
Exactly. Thank you. Exactly. It is an inescapable logic of using language in this way, right? It's very rational, highly rational at this point. So let me go ahead and just skip ahead. This one, I have worked, from Eliot to Olson. Then I also had, of course, to do a ritual clearing of Galway Canals the bear. How many people know Galway Canals the bear? Come on, Galway Canals the bear. The one. No? Okay.
It's in the Book of Nightmares, right?
I don't even know what book it's in. I just know that it was one of the poems that I had to read very early in my, it's anthologized in every single anthology. So basically, get this. Galway Canal in the 90s was like, I mean, you wouldn't, right? I mean, big poet in that very mainstream Eliot lineage. So this poem, The Bear, from what I recall, is a poem about, it kind of in that energy of Robert Bly, right? The guy going into the woods and shoots a bear. No, he sees a bear, or the bear's dead, and he crawls into the bear, and he's inside the blubber, and the blubber becomes him, and then he becomes even more of a man, but no, he really is a writer. That's is that right? Something like that? You have to go and Google it and read it, and you'll see. It's a long poem, and you'll be like, she probably didn't exactly do that justice, but that's the gist.
You did it. That was the Bly guy.
That's the
Bly
gist.
guy moment.
The Bly guy moment. Right. So Canal.
There are drums in the poem.
Oh,
Yeah.
They're just boom,
The poem
boom,
itself.
boom. Absolutely, and it just gets more and more and more and more and more and more, and then you're inside the bear. Remember that moment? Mm-hmm. So here it is. It's a short poem, but it's a ritual.
Did you say inside the girl?
Anyway, did I?
No, you didn't.
No.
Anyway, go on.
Exactly, but this is the ritual clearing of that, where it's a whole other thing. The Hunter. A ritual clearing of Galway Canals the bear. I imagined from those woods a clearing opening to that snarled bear, and I imagined you with your knife breaking her twice, once with a cut from throat to vulva, and once with the slight tremor of your heart, which, animal that you are, gave her a moment of hope that instead of mounting her, you would take her in, offer her shelter, lie with her still as the poetry she now must live to write.
Everything's reversed, right?
Yes, exactly. So that was that one. Okay, so I want to be sensitive here about this, about our evening. And I think I'll just read one more and leave the Eliot, my revision of the four quartets. I did bring something. I'm not sure if you've seen this. You let me know. You probably have. But it is a really terrific essay published by an English person, English scholar and poet, named Brandon Gilliot. Did you see this when it came out?
No.
By any chance? And it begins, a little over a month ago, news emerged of a significant purchase made by the Eliot estate. And it tells the story of of the Eliot House, and it tells the story of Olson, and how Olson is completely left out of the narrative, and it's called T.S. Eliot, Charles Olson, and the Occupation of Gloucester. So I've made that copy for you in case you hadn't seen that, because it's really... Bam! I was like, "Woo! That's where I'm living. Like this is where I'm at right now. Like this is consolidating a lot." So speaking of another ritual clearing, this time when I first got to Gloucester, Glenn Maxwell published in the New Yorker a poem that we three have decided, and this is a. I know it's exciting for the Eliot House to have a poem published in the New Yorker, but this was published a couple of weeks ago, and it's basically a poem saying, "Hey, Tom, what's up with all these coyotes? These coyotes are kind of like they're all over the place, and yet here I am in this house, and it was supposed to be like England." But there's coyotes running all over the place. They're making quite a racket. What do you suppose they're talking about, Tom? Believe it or not, that, once again, look it up and then decide whether my little summary is the correct summary. But I'll just kind of close with this, which is a little moving through Eliot's Gloucester notebook, which is the notebook which did lead him to write Proof Rock. And basically, his Gloucester notebook is really a description of Eliot trying to establish himself within very high bourgeois culture, looking out and othering. It's like othering. So I made a list of all the things that he's othering. And I would argue that those coyotes are the yellow fog, if you know your Proof Rock. You know what? I feel like this might be a little bit long to read now, and maybe we should actually.
Look at me because I've taken the mother role in this.
No, not because you've taken the mother role, but because it
Confab.
has been, I'm realizing, like 25 minutes. Has it been 25 minutes?
I
It's
don't
kind
know.
of.
Look, ask Eric.
If it's been 25 minutes.
We could break. I could do my thing, and then we could
If there's time, do that. Yeah, let's do
kind
that.
of what we did the other.
Yeah.
What
Do
I
that.
did the other night.
Yeah. But
But actually,
I mean,
you know,
I'll-
I have to say the commentary is also the poem. So
exactly.
I mean, I'm getting something from just
Yeah.
the introductions.
Exactly. So, and this is a poem that's not 100% finished. It's more just that, like, again, the process was go through the Gloucester notebooks and find all the places where Eliot is just hating
You know what?
on Gloucester. So, from the inside looking out, Tom sees Gloucester only as streets, people with insidious intent, tedious, restless, cheap, sawdust, overwhelming. In other words, the yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes. There's your coyote, Glenn. No need to poke the ghost. Dare I disturb the universe? And yet the universe is disturbed. The fog, the smoke, the encroaching, oilcloth curling up the stairs, evil houses, ribald finger pointing in darkness, whispering, clucking, mocking. These are the words he's using. Darkness crawling, fears and anxieties makes for nausea, or madness, who is a drunken man who sings and mutters. And then, quote, I have seen the darkness creep along the wall. unquote, then suddenly dissolve and fall away. Dear Tom, come on now. Join the mermaids, eat a peach, walk on the beach, part your hair behind, wear the bottom of your trousers rolled. Become human, it will enliven you, the coyote will be your kin. So much intelligence to converse with. Eastern coyote, Canis latrans themos, literally translated as dog barking brush. When it howls, it is not at nothing, it is because they're telling non-family members to stay out of their territory, they're locating their family members within the territory, they're advertising for a mate, their pups practicing howling, and there's a potential threat toward the pups. That's, so it's like Glenn, his question to Tom was, again, why are all of these coyotes howling, right? It's making me uncomfortable. Kim actually is the one who said it best. But the question that Glenn asks of Tom about this howling, he doesn't bother to look up and figure out who these coyotes are and what they're doing. He dares to ask the question, what do we poets do when it's nothing? Meaning, what do we poets do when we know that the coyotes are howling for nothing? They're just howling for the heck of it. Seriously? Right? So it's just a continuation of the othering, right? Do you know what I'm saying? Just like, that's my final. Work in progress. I'll be back.
Always a work in progress. The other.
Okay.
No machine gun though, right?
No machine gun.
Not at all.
But a coyote by
Not
my
at
side.
all. Not at all.
We are reassembled. Lyndon Norton is an artist, writer, musician, and teacher whose body of work includes essays, poems, collages, memoir, music, gorgeously modified postcards, all kinds of unclassifiable texts and objects which explore what she calls the romance and propaganda of American stories and her fraught relationships with history, politics, and the self. What is moving is that the work is an expression of the conviction that an index or an archive of the 20th and 21st century self is a plausible but difficult task. Recently, I heard the poet Robert Pinsky assert that the highest aims of democracy might be highly personal. As the body politic is allowed to reinvent itself, so the individual, given absolute freedom, is free to improvise, to invent her understanding of herself. And I think that's what we see in action in Norton's work. Missing me one place, search another, Whitman said. Norton uses Irish weavers to revisit this idea. In no case is the whole pattern given. There are certain gaps and yawns, and part of the pattern is left out, as if it doesn't matter, or was too lovely, so was lost. Norton's poetry and art is the recovery of those discarded parts of the pattern as she seeks to make something whole. Please join me in welcoming Linda Norton.
I didn't expect to be taken seriously. That should be on my tombstone. So I'm enjoying my time with Mary, Kim, and Kay. I feel like we're a band, but bands always break up, and Kay's leaving.
I'll be back.
And I know you will. And Kay, I've known since they were working on Helen Adams stuff, and since I was a publisher. And I worked for the University of California Press, so I published Olson, Creeley, Duncan, Niedeker, and a million other people. And I don't only associate with myself with poetry, but that's what speaks to this group. But I published in all fields. And I had this book, but in 2010, after living in a one-bedroom apartment for 14 years with my daughter, I decided to move to a two-bedroom, which meant my rent went up 60%. So I sold all my first editions to Moe's, and I made $750, which is not, it's not easy actually in the book trade to make $750. You think, oh, I have so many wonderful books, but anyway, that paid for the move. And I don't mind losing books because I love libraries, and there they are for me. That was such a nice introduction. And what can I say? I'm glad you mentioned the Irish stuff. So I've been teaching in Ireland for 5 semesters, and I'm a citizen of Ireland, but I'm a citizen by way of illegitimacy because my father was illegitimate, which, if you can tell me a more misogynist word, please, let's have a drink after and let me know. There isn't one, including cunt. There is no more misogynist word. And his mother was an Irish immigrant, and she was a servant on an estate like the one we're staying at right now. And in fact, she summered as a servant in Topsfield. And my father died in November, and I looked into who his father was, and I did the DNA. And I am not obsessed with finding out who the particular person was, but I can tell you that it was a Nova Scotian person in Essex County. And so then a big part of my work in researching this has been, is my father the product of rape? And would that explain some of the immense obscenity and tragedy in my family? But you know, even if it was the result of, as my Irish friends would say, a kiss and a cuddle, it's still a tragedy. And so is this fucking Supreme Court. And I went to a Jesuit college, and I was there during the incubation phase of this right-wing Catholic hegemony. So that's my animus. But I'm not going to talk about that or read about that today.
Do you mind speaking up a little bit?
Yeah,
Thank you.
now I will, because that's too private, so I speak softly. I'm going to read from, so these are my books, Whiteout, and my editor, Dick, is here. This is published by Hanging Loose Press, and it's made of diaries and some poems, 80% prose and 20% poetry. And this is my first book published by Bill Corbett, and it's also narrative made of diaries and poems. And we read, I keep thinking you read with me, but you were there. I read in Michael Franco's series with Jim Dunn the other night, and I read from the book that I'm writing here. And Jim mentioned my little experiments during the pandemic with a procedural approach. So I'm going to read from a short book that I've written with those poems, 30 poems, and an essay about procedural poetics that went into it. Let's see. When the pandemic hit, it's called Cloud of Witnesses, and it's dedicated to Fannie Howe, because it's both the New Testament cloud and it's also the Zoom cloud in which we lived. And my procedure was I would pile stacks of books up. I already taught online before the pandemic, so I'd been doing this for years. I'd pile books up, and then during the pandemic, it was so horribly, horribly lonely. Now I know people who are trapped with each other had their own problems, but the loneliness problem was also very severe. So I had just worked so hard on this book, and I was just numb. And I had COVID in March 2020. And so I would take each line, each book, open, look at the recto page, and choose a line and make a poem out of a line from each of the books in the stack. So that's how I did that. So when the pandemic hit, I was finishing my term as columnist in residence for San Francisco Museum of Modern Art's Open Space. My April 2020 column, it turned out, was a valediction for a way of life that was so important to the making of my books the life of streets and trains, gyms and locker rooms and churches, and post offices and public libraries and pools and parks in Oakland and New York. I wrote a brief introduction to my last column for Open Space, April 7th, 2020, Quarantina, and the quote is from Ted Berrigan from So Going Around Cities. And Berrigan, too, I published when I was a publisher, when Alice and her sons needed to find somebody to publish the collected Berrigan. And I think Douglas Oliver had just died, and I was leaving my job, but we did put that under contract and make that book, Quarantina. And now I'm with you instantly, and I'll see you tomorrow night, and I see you constantly, hopefully through one or the other of us is, one of the other of us is off into the body-mind's own self, more or less out of sight, ! Ted Berrigan. At the beginning of March, I went out to dinner with my daughter for what I now know might be the last meal I eat in a restaurant for a long time. We stopped into the parking garage in Jack London Square, where my friend Ivory was working in the booth at the In-N-Out gate. When she saw me, she came out of the booth and gave me a bear hug. I'd stopped touching people because I'd been sick, and I was afraid I might be contagious, but I hugged her back. Ivory's a friend from the Oakland YMCA. The Y has been my third place for decades. My congregation, my Sangha. My second book includes many scenes set there. I miss the life of the streets and the locker rooms. I miss the women and the occasional man at the nail shop where I get pedicures. I miss ordinary errands. I miss my life with others. In other words, I miss the non-digital, tangible world and what the streets had always given me, a place to see and be seen and to learn. Prior to the pandemic, I wrote books about the interplay of my private and public life. Aging, I was less object than subject when out and about, and I was growing used to this. In my late 50s, I wrote something in response to one of writer John Keene's emotional outreach prompts. And the prompt is, one day over the next half year, imagine that your life is a work of art and behave as if it is all day long. At the very end of the day, write about a paragraph about the experience. I sent the poem to John, and he published it on his blog in 2018, and here it is. Song of Myself. Filmmaker, star, a doctor examining the culture, me on a walk. On the pavement, I noticed an electric blue Post-it from that batch I stole when I quit my job. Taylor, negritude, milk, and you, my dirty to-do list. I must have walked this way last week and dropped it. In December sun, I hurry past the cathedral like it might get me. Then I saunter Thoreau like Santerre in California, and again, I'm everything. The spinsters Thoreau disparaged, the turtles he saw copulating and tried to separate, the mother who saves him from civilization, open to alms. My loneliness is like a poem by Fanny. By this time, my parka is off. In the co-op bakery, when I get to the counter, the cashier is dazzled for a minute. You look like Elizabeth Taylor. But then he wonders if he's right not to offer me the senior discount yet. I say, that's right, not yet. Let's see. I do this, I do that. Frank O'Hara's approach to living and writing was one I shared until the pandemic put the brakes on it. So I invented an artistic practice to be with the living and the dead in New York and Ireland and New England and elsewhere. In other words, all of you. And all the books. All alone at my desk in Oakland. Meditations in another emergency. Alone with the unbelievable yet inevitable obscenity of America in 2020 and 2021. And I'll read one of the poems made out of the practice I just described. So the poems go on one page. In most cases, they're one-page poems. And then the attributions, which I consider also concrete poems, are a block that go on the facing page. and they're my community. 5/26/2020, Cloud of Witnesses. A divine enticement, a labyrinth, a trap. They all sat very still. In dreams you see through solids. How, like looking through seawater, is the work of memory. I knew only that I was composed of several breeds, a different thing altogether from knowing that one has to go on indefinitely, repeating the same order, and we never become known to the larger public. So that came from, these are the attributions, Simone Bay, Fanny, Simone Bay, and Bob Hirshon from Freeze Frame. And there's one that I'm not going to read where I was Zooming with Dick and his wife Abby, and they couldn't figure out how to unmute themselves. And I'd had this experience a few times, and we all did eventually, didn't we? And I could see Dick saying the words, but I couldn't hear him. How does this thing work? And that's the title of the poem, but I'm not reading that one. I followed the rules of my practice to the letter. Somebody asked me when I was in Boston before I came down here if I ever felt torn between my kids. So my kids are big characters in both my books, and it is a huge comfort to me that Kim has her hands on this second book and is kind of reading it. I mean, one never knows, but it is a comfort. It is a huge comfort to me to have somebody kind of in this material, and Dick, of course, knows it. And my daughter is white. She looks like me, but she's 5 inches taller, light, tall and thin. And my son is black, and he's 6'4", and he came into my life when he was 17. And somebody asked me if I ever felt torn between my kids. Only during the pandemic, after Ahmaud Arbery died, did I feel torn, because I had to make some decisions about how safe everybody had to be. So if I saw one kid and we were out, I couldn't see the other kid and her boyfriend because I might get them sick. And I'd never actually had that experience. And all the kids were involved in this, and it's fine. But it's not fine because it's America. It's not okay. I followed the rules of my practice to the letter until one day in July I pulled a pile of books off the children's stack in my bedroom. First on the stack was the 3rd volume of March, Congressman John Lewis's graphic novel series about the March on Washington. I opened the book to a random recto page and found the grave words that would begin my poem. I spent the day alone in my apartment watching President Kennedy's funeral. Then I glanced at the rest of the fun books at the stack I'd pulled off the shelf and knew I'd have to adjust my practice and make conscious choices from the books I'd unconsciously pulled off my shelf, so I did. And somehow the whole poem, with lines from Maurice Sendak, P.D. Eastman, William Steig, Arnold Lobel's Frog and Toad, and Kay Thompson's Eloise books, lived up to Lewis's opening lines about the Birmingham bombing. And it's 7/17/2020, and the title is I Can't Believe You're Still Alive. I spent the day alone in my apartment watching President Kennedy's funeral. I kept thinking about Medgar Evers and little girls in Birmingham, escapees from a magician's dream. What on earth are you talking about? There was a silver moon rising in the sky. I looked like nothing at all, and when I looked up, there stood the dear little child wearing the same little dress. If you do not understand, simply nod your head and say, no comprendo. You absolutely have to have your camera ready at all times. How could anything so terribly wrong be allowed to happen? Tears from on her eyelashes, her mother's work. I did have a mother. I know I did. I have to find her. They went back to the woods and looked on the dark paths. Here's to friendship, family, and more shared adventures in the year ahead. And then, we're getting to the end. So, an editor at the Progressive wrote to me and asked me if I had any work. And I said, no, I don't have any work, I just have this shit. So I sent her this and they published it. 6/24/2020 on the death of a friend of a friend. And this is for my bestie in Ireland, whose name is Alice Lyons. She's a great poet, and her friend Eileen Hughes, who died then. Thinking, drinking, thinking. I never knew which came first, the thinking or the drinking. Psyche, as always, recovered herself. As an artist, you learn these lessons all over again with a vengeance. How different the world looked only a few hours ago. We are 7 echoes in my head like a nightmare of responsibility. We are homesick for the key to a canon of delight, a situation which is too foul to be the subject of a tragedy, and it may be an immense relief if it can be shown that one's life has the pattern rather of a tragedy, the tragic working out and repetition of a pattern, a worthwhile flavor, or red, or salve. Every procession ends in a funeral and goes away on a boat. Whenever a book ends, silence as if stewardship had ceased. And then I'll just read the very end of the essay, and not any more of the poems after that, but it's like, warning, you're almost done. It's half a page. I've worked in 5 libraries and am dependent on them. And when my daughter was little, she was always around me and writers, and she wasn't quite sure what we all did, because I worked in libraries and publishers, and she said, Mom, when I grow up I want to be a booker like you. Especially because I sold or traded hundreds of my own books, I'm dependent on those libraries. When the Oakland Public Library reopened some months into the pandemic, I ordered books online and picked them up at the curb. One of the first books I got at the library was Letters to the Future, Black Women Radical Writing, edited by Erica Hunt and Don Lundy Martin. Into my notebook I copied lines from 2 of my favorite poets. From Wanda Coleman, Things Well Up, and from Lucille Clifton, There are some poems that want to be written, and I was available. Now it's July 2022, and there are vaccines, and there's a new president, first black female vice president, first black female Supreme Court justice, rampant white supremacist terrorism, big new war in Europe, virus floods, viruses. Yesterday I watched Joni Mitchell's recent performance at the Newport Jazz Festival. She's been ill and hadn't performed in a long time. At least we have Joni Mitchell. Yes, Catherine Van Arenduk writes about Mitchell's performance in an article under that headline in New York Magazine. She is not reaching to get back to her young self. She's reinterpreting those songs through who she has become, making herself available to what wells up. Thank you.